The night my husband called me a failure and walked out of our marriage, he had no idea he was leaving behind a woman worth $4 to $7 million. Hey everyone, I'm sharing this story because I need you to know that sometimes the people closest to us see only what they want to see. If you're watching from somewhere in the world where you've ever felt invisible in your own life, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. This story changed everything for me, and maybe it'll change something for you too. Before I dive in, I need to ask you something. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to love you, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story, it's a reminder that we are never as powerless as others want us to believe. My name is Rebecca, and for 8 years, I lived in a beautiful lie. Our house in Westchester County was everything you'd picture when you think of success. White columns, circular driveway, perfectly manicured lawn that Marcus insisted be cut every Wednesday whether it needed it or not. From the outside, we looked like the American dream wrapped in a bow. Marcus Crawford was the kind of man who commanded attention when he walked into a room. 6'2", silver at his temples even though he was only 38, with a kind of confident smile that made people assume he knew something they didn't. He worked in commercial real estate, closing deals that made him feel important, driving a BMW that he washed every Sunday morning in our driveway like it was a religious ritual. I worked as a marketing coordinator at Patterson & Associates, a mid-sized firm in Manhattan. Every morning, I'd put on my careful business casual outfits, kiss Marcus goodbye, and take the train into the city to sit in meetings about campaigns I'd never see come to life. My salary was decent, $68,000 a year, but in our social circle, it made me the wife with the little job. Marcus never said it directly, but I felt it in the way he'd introduce me at dinner parties. This is my wife Rebecca. She works in marketing. Never she's brilliant at marketing or she's building something amazing. Just she works in marketing, like I was playing office instead of contributing to our life. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Rebecca Crawford, the marketing coordinator, was a carefully constructed cover story. The real me had been building something else entirely. It started 5 years ago with a conversation I overheard on the train. 2 women in their 50s were talking about how impossible it was to find quality home organization services that didn't cost a fortune. One of them mentioned spending $3,000 to have someone organize her closet, only to have it fall apart within months because the systems weren't sustainable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about inefficiency, about people paying premium prices for services that didn't actually solve their problems. By 3 in the morning, I was sketching out ideas for a different kind of organization company, one that focused on creating systems people could actually maintain. I started small. I used my maiden name, Rebecca Walsh, and began offering services on weekends. Just a few hours here and there, telling Marcus I was having coffee with friends or running errands. My first client paid me $200 to organize her kitchen pantry. It took me 3 hours, and when I was done, she cried because she said it was the first time in years she could find everything she needed. That feeling, the rush of solving a real problem for someone, was addictive. Within 6 months, I had 12 regular clients. Within a year, I had hired 2 part-time assistants and was booked solid. The business grew quietly, carefully, while Marcus thought I was just going through a social phase of helping friends with their homes. I called it Walsh Systems, and I built it like I was planning for war. Every dollar the business made went into a separate account Marcus never knew existed. I used a P.O. box for all business correspondence. I scheduled everything for weekends or evenings, claiming I was taking up yoga or joining a book club. Marcus was so busy with his own career and his Wednesday golf games that he never questioned where I really was. By year 3, Walsh Systems had 15 full-time employees and a waiting list 6 months long. We weren't just organizing closets anymore. We were designing complete home systems for busy professionals who were willing to pay premium prices for solutions that actually worked. My average client paid between $8,000 and $12,000 for a full home transformation. By year 4, we had expanded into corporate organizing, helping businesses streamline their physical spaces and workflow systems. That's when the money really started flowing. A single corporate contract could bring in $50,000 to $75,000. Marcus had no idea that while he was bragging about his latest $20,000 commission, I was quietly building a business that was generating over $2 million in annual revenue. But it wasn't just the business income that Marcus didn't know about. When I was 26, 2 years before I met Marcus, my grandmother passed away and left me her property in upstate New York. Not just a house, 160 acres of prime development land that had been in our family for 4 generations. At the time, Marcus and I were just dating, and I was grieving and overwhelmed. I never mentioned it to him, just quietly paid the property taxes and maintenance costs, thinking someday I'd figure out what to do with it. Last year, a development company approached me about purchasing the land. They were planning a luxury housing development and were willing to pay $14 million for the property. Instead of selling, I negotiated a partnership deal. I kept ownership of 30% of the development, and they handled all the construction and marketing. The project is set to generate returns of over $25 million over the next 5 years. Then there was the downtown property I'd purchased 3 years ago using business profits. A small building in what everyone said was a questionable neighborhood, but I could see the gentrification patterns. I bought it for $400,000, spent another $100,000 renovating it into luxury lofts, and now it generates $18,000 a month in rental income. The property is worth almost $2 million today. So while Marcus saw his wife who made $68,000 a year at her little marketing job, the reality was that Rebecca Walsh owned a thriving business, multiple properties, and had a net worth that approached $50 million. I told myself I was protecting my independence, keeping something that was just mine. But deep down, I think I knew I was protecting myself from something else entirely. I was protecting myself from becoming completely financially dependent on a man who was already starting to see me as less than equal. And I was about to find out just how right I'd been to hide everything. The first sign something was changing came on a Tuesday evening in early March. Marcus had been working late more frequently, which wasn't unusual during busy seasons in real estate. But that night, when he finally came home at almost 11, his shirt smelled like perfume that wasn't mine. Not overwhelmingly, just a faint trace of something floral and expensive that lingered when he kissed my forehead and mumbled about being exhausted. I stood in our marble-tiled kitchen, watching him loosen his tie, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not jealousy exactly, but recognition. The way he avoided eye contact. The way he went straight to the shower instead of sitting down to eat the dinner I'd kept warm for him. The way he seemed to be performing the role of tired husband rather than actually being one. "How was your day?" I asked when he came back downstairs, hair still damp, wearing the pajama pants I'd bought him for Christmas. "Exhausting. The Morrison deal is falling apart, and I had to spend hours on the phone with their attorney." He opened the refrigerator and grabbed a beer, even though he rarely drank during the week. "What about you? More organizing parties with the ladies?" There it was, that dismissive tone that had been creeping into his voice more often lately. Like my time was spent playing house while he handled the real business of our lives. Actually, I had an interesting consultation today. A family in Scarsdale wants help with their entire house. 5 bedrooms, home office, 3-car garage. It's a big project. Marcus nodded absently, scrolling through his phone while he drank his beer. "That's nice, honey. Just don't let it interfere with the Henderson dinner party on Saturday. Janet's husband just made partner, and these connections matter." I watched him standing there, already mentally somewhere else, and realized he hadn't asked a single follow-up question about my work. He didn't know that the Scarsdale project was actually a $15,000 contract. He didn't know that Walsh Systems was booked solid through the end of the year. He didn't know that earlier that day, I'd signed a contract with a Fortune 500 company to organize their entire corporate headquarters, a deal worth $250,000. But I also realized I hadn't told him any of this. For years, I'd been editing myself down to the version of me that Marcus could understand and wouldn't feel threatened by. Over the next few weeks, the signs multiplied. Marcus's phone, which used to sit casually on the kitchen counter, was now always face down or in his pocket. He developed a sudden interest in going to the gym at odd hours, 7 in the morning before work, or 9 at night after dinner. When I suggested we join together, he said he preferred his current routine. The Wednesday golf games became Thursday golf games, then Friday evening golf games. When I mentioned that was an unusual time for golf, he explained that his group was trying to avoid the weekend crowds. I wanted to confront him, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear of what I'd discover, or maybe it was the growing realization that I wasn't sure I cared as much as I should have. Instead, I threw myself deeper into Walsh Systems. That spring, we landed our biggest corporate contract yet, a tech startup that wanted us to design the organizational systems for their new headquarters in Manhattan. The project would take 4 months and pay $400,000. I'd have to spend several days a week on site, managing the team and working directly with their executives. When I told Marcus about my new schedule, I framed it carefully. I'm going to be helping a friend with a big project in the city. It might mean some longer days for the next few months. He looked up from his laptop, where he was presumably working on client presentations, though I'd noticed he seemed to be doing a lot more texting than typing lately. Just make sure it doesn't affect our commitments, he said. The Riverside Club dinner is next month, and the Pattersons' anniversary party. I need you there, Rebecca. These events matter for my business. I nodded and smiled, the way I'd been doing for months. But inside, I was calculating. The tech startup project alone would generate more profit than Marcus's entire annual income. While he was worried about me being available for cocktail parties, I was quietly building something that could change both our lives, if only he knew it existed. But Marcus's attention was clearly focused elsewhere. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in May. I'd finished early at the tech company and decided to surprise Marcus by picking up dinner from his favorite Italian restaurant. I knew he'd been stressed about a difficult client, and I thought maybe we could reconnect over a quiet meal at home. His car wasn't in our driveway, which was odd since he told me he'd be working from home that afternoon. I called his cell phone, and it went straight to voicemail. I tried his office line, and the receptionist told me he'd left around 3. I waited until almost 9 before he finally came home, looking flustered and slightly out of breath. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice light and curious rather than accusatory. "I brought home Torinos, but it's cold now." "I was showing properties. The Brennan listing in Rye. The clients were only available after 7. He kissed my cheek quickly and headed toward the stairs. "I need to shower and make some calls." I watched him go, then quietly pulled out my phone and Googled the Brennan listing in Rye. It had sold 3 weeks ago. That night, I lay awake listening to Marcus breathe beside me, and I realized our marriage had become a performance we were both putting on for reasons neither of us wanted to examine too closely. He was lying to me about where he spent his evenings, and I was lying to him about having built a multi-million-dollar business empire. We were 2 people sharing a bed and a mortgage, each hiding our real lives from the other. But while Marcus was hiding an affair, I was hiding something that could set me free. I just didn't know yet that I was going to need that freedom sooner than I imagined. Her name was Vanessa Chen, and she was everything I used to think I wanted to be. I discovered her existence on a rainy Saturday afternoon in June while Marcus was out at what he claimed was a client meeting. I'd been organizing files in his home office, something I'd offered to do as a surprise, thinking it would show him I understood the pressures of his business, when I found a receipt tucked inside one of his folders. Dinner for 2 at Le Bernardin. $247. On a Thursday evening when he told me he was working late at the office. My hands were shaking as I carefully photographed the receipt and put it back exactly where I'd found it. Le Bernardin wasn't the kind of place you took clients for business dinners. It was the kind of place you took someone you were trying to impress, someone you wanted to seduce with oysters and champagne in dim lighting. That night, I created a fake social media account and started looking. It took me 3 days to find her. Vanessa Chen, 31 years old, worked in interior design for high-end residential clients. Her Instagram was a carefully curated showcase of beautiful homes, art gallery openings, and herself, always herself. She was petite in that delicate way that made men want to protect her, with long black hair and the kind of effortless style that actually required a lot of effort to maintain. In one photo from 2 weeks ago, she was at a wine bar in Soho, laughing at something off camera. I could see Marcus's reflection in the window behind her, just the edge of his profile, but I knew that jawline, that posture. The caption read, "Perfect evening with someone special. Sometimes the best surprises come when you least expect them." Red heart hash. I stared at that photo for 20 minutes, zooming in on details, looking for clues about how long this had been going on. Her previous posts showed a progression I recognized now that I knew what to look for. Dinner at increasingly expensive restaurants. Weekend trips to the Hamptons. A new designer handbag that cost more than most people's rent. Marcus was courting her the way he'd once courted me, with expensive gestures and careful attention to luxury details. Except now he could afford to do it properly, thanks to the life we'd built together. The life I'd helped build with my $68,000 salary and my careful budgeting and my willingness to skip vacations so he could invest more in his business. What made it worse was that I could see why he'd chosen her. Vanessa represented everything I wasn't anymore. She was young enough to be impressed by his success, established enough in her own career to be interesting, and beautiful in that polished way that looked effortless in photographs. She posted pictures of art galleries and charity events, the kind of cultural activities that Marcus had always wished I was more interested in. Looking through her photos, I could see the woman I might have been if I hadn't spent the last 5 years building Walsh systems in secret. If I'd focused on being the kind of wife who enhanced her husband's image instead of building my own empire. But what Marcus and Vanessa both failed to understand was that I wasn't just the dowdy wife he was cheating on. I was the woman who owned the building where Vanessa's design firm rented office space. That's right. The sleek downtown property I'd purchased and renovated 3 years ago. Vanessa Chen Design was one of my tenants, paying me $3,800 a month for her beautiful corner unit with the floor-to-ceiling windows and exposed brick walls. Every month, Vanessa unknowingly wrote a rent check that contributed to my growing wealth, while she slept with my husband and probably pitied me for being stuck in a marriage with a man who was clearly too sophisticated for his boring suburban wife. The irony was delicious, but it was also infuriating. I started watching them without quite admitting to myself that's what I was doing. I knew Marcus's schedule, and I knew when he was lying about where he was going. I started taking longer lunch breaks from Patterson and Associates, driving to different neighborhoods where I'd seen them in Vanessa's social media posts. I saw them together at a cafe in Tribeca on a Wednesday afternoon when Marcus had told me he was showing properties in Westchester. They sat close together at a small table, Vanessa's hand resting on Marcus's arm while they shared what looked like an intimate conversation. She was wearing the kind of outfit that looked casual but probably cost more than I used to spend on clothes in 3 months. Perfectly tailored jeans, a silk blouse, leather jacket that looked buttersoft. Marcus was leaning toward her in that focused way I remembered from our early dating days, when he used to make me feel like I was the most fascinating person in any room. Now I was watching him direct that same intense attention toward someone else, and I felt something harder than jealousy settle in my chest. I felt rage. Not just at Marcus for cheating, but at both of them for the assumptions they were making about me. In their minds, I was the obstacle to their happiness, the boring wife who didn't understand Marcus's ambitions, who held him back with my simple dreams and ordinary expectations. They had no idea that while they were falling in love over expensive dinners, I was quietly building something that could buy and sell Marcus's entire business portfolio 10 times over. That night, I went home and did something I'd never done before. I calculated my exact net worth, writing down every asset, every property, every business account. The number that stared back at me from my private laptop screen was staggering, $47 million. I was worth $47 million, and my husband was cheating on me with a woman who paid me rent. But I still wasn't ready to play my hand. Not yet. Because I was starting to realize that this betrayal might be the gift I'd been waiting for, the excuse I needed to stop pretending to be smaller than I was. I just had to wait for the right moment to use it. July brought a heat wave that made the whole city feel like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I spent more time at the tech company headquarters, managing the final phases of our organizational overhaul, while Marcus spent more time showing properties that seemed to require an unusual amount of evening and weekend hours. We'd settled into a routine of polite distance. He'd kiss my forehead in the morning, I'd ask about his day in the evening, and we'd both pretend we didn't notice how carefully we were avoiding any real intimacy. It was like living with a considerate roommate who happened to share my bed and my last name. But I wasn't just passively accepting the situation anymore. I was planning. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator. Not for evidence. I already had plenty of that from my own observations and Vanessa's enthusiastic social media documentation of their relationship. I hired Detective Patricia Reeves because I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with before I made my next move. Patricia was a former NYPD detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations. She was in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that made you want to tell her the truth even when you weren't planning to. We met at a coffee shop in Manhattan, far from anywhere Marcus or I usually went. I need to know everything, I told her. How long it's been going on, what he's telling her about me, what his plans are. I need to know if this is a fling or if he's planning to leave our marriage. Patricia nodded like she'd heard this story 100 times before. What outcome are you hoping for? Reconciliation or divorce? I realized I'd never asked myself that question directly. I want to know what I'm dealing with before I decide what I'm going to do about it. Over the next 3 weeks, Patricia gave me a complete picture of Marcus and Vanessa's relationship. They'd been seeing each other for almost 6 months, meeting initially when Marcus listed a property that Vanessa's client was interested in purchasing. The affair had progressed quickly from professional interaction to personal relationship, and they were now essentially living together on the days when Marcus wasn't home with me. Vanessa had a 1-bedroom apartment in Chelsea that cost $4,500 a month, more than twice what she paid for her office space in my building. Marcus had been helping with her rent for the past 2 months, which explains some of the financial pressure I'd noticed him mention recently. He's told her he's planning to file for divorce after his next big sale closes, Patricia told me during our final meeting. Apparently, he's been waiting for the right financial moment to end the marriage. He's told Vanessa that his wife, that's you, doesn't understand his ambitions and that the marriage has been over emotionally for years. I sat in the coffee shop, stirring my latte and processing this information. Marcus was planning to leave me, but he was waiting for his next commission check to make sure he could afford to do it comfortably. There's something else, Patricia said, sliding a folder across the table. He's been meeting with a divorce attorney. James Morrison specializes in high-asset divorces. They've met twice in the past month. I opened the folder and saw photographs of Marcus entering and leaving Morrison's office building. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus was consulting with a high-asset divorce attorney while having no idea that his wife was the one with the high assets. Based on the attorney he's chosen and the questions I managed to get from my contact in Morrison's office, your husband is planning to ask for spousal support and half the marital assets, Patricia continued. He seems to believe he's entitled to compensation for supporting your career while you are building your marketing experience. I actually laughed out loud at that. The other coffee shop patrons looked over, but I couldn't help myself. Marcus thought he was going to divorce his underachieving wife and collect alimony based on his superior earning power, while planning to start a new life with a younger woman whose rent he was already helping to pay. Mrs. Crawford, Patricia said carefully, I don't usually give advice beyond the facts, but you should know that in New York State, assets acquired during marriage are generally considered marital property, regardless of whose name they are in. If your husband files for divorce, he could be entitled to a significant portion of everything you've built. The smile disappeared from my face. What do you mean? I mean that business you've been building, those properties you own, if you acquired them during your marriage, your husband could claim 50% in a divorce settlement, even if he didn't know they existed. I felt the blood drain from my face. In all my careful planning and secret empire building, I'd never considered that Marcus could have a legal claim to Walsh Systems and my real estate investments. The thought of him walking away with half of everything I'd built while planning to start over with Vanessa made my stomach turn. What would you do? I asked Patricia. If you were me. She looked at me for a long moment, probably weighing how much she should say to a client. I'd make sure I controlled the narrative. Right now, your husband thinks he's the one with all the power in this relationship. He's planning his exit strategy based on information he doesn't actually have. If I were you, I'd want him to understand exactly what he'd be walking away from before he makes any irreversible decisions. That conversation changed everything for me. I'd been thinking about this situation as a personal betrayal, a marriage that had run its course. But now I understood it was a business negotiation where the other party was operating with incomplete information. I spent the next week putting together a comprehensive file of all my assets, business records, and property ownership documents. I wanted to be prepared for any conversation that might be coming. But I also started planning something else, a way to show Marcus exactly who he'd been married to all along. Because if he was going to leave me for Vanessa, thinking he was trading up from a boring suburban wife to a successful, sophisticated woman, he deserved to understand the true cost of that decision. And I was going to make sure he understood it in a way he'd never forget. The opportunity came on a sweltering Thursday evening in late July when Marcus announced he needed to attend a last-minute client dinner that would probably run late. "Don't wait up for me," he said, kissing my cheek with the same casual affection he'd show a sister. "The Hendersons are finally ready to move forward on the Bronxville property, but they want to discuss some changes over dinner." I nodded sympathetically, playing the role of the understanding wife. "That's wonderful news about the Hendersons. I know how hard you've been working on that deal." What I didn't tell him was that I'd already confirmed the Hendersons were out of town visiting their daughter in California. What I also didn't mention was that I'd spent the afternoon making some very specific preparations. After Marcus left, I waited exactly 30 minutes, then called Vanessa's office number. I'd practiced this conversation in my head a dozen times, but my heart was still racing when she picked up. "Vanessa Chen Design. This is Vanessa." "Hi Vanessa, this is Rebecca Walsh from Walsh Property Management. I own the building where your office is located." There was a brief pause. Vanessa knew me as her landlord, though we'd only interacted through email and the occasional brief phone call about building maintenance issues. "Oh, hi Rebecca. Is everything okay with the building?" "Actually, I was calling because I have an unusual request. I'm meeting with some potential investors tomorrow who are interested in purchasing the building, and I wanted to show them one of our premium units. Would it be possible for me to bring them by your office around 7 tomorrow evening? I know it's after hours, but your space really showcases what we've done with the renovation." "Tomorrow evening." Vanessa sounded hesitant. "I actually have plans." "I completely understand if the timing doesn't work. It's just that these investors are only in town for one day, and your unit really is the best example of the building's potential. I'd be happy to reduce your rent by $500 next month as a thank you for accommodating the showing." $500 was enough to make anyone reconsider their evening plans, especially someone whose boyfriend was helping pay her rent. "Actually, let me check my calendar," Vanessa said. "You know what, I think I can make that work. 7 o'clock tomorrow." "Perfect. I really appreciate this, Vanessa. I'll try to keep the showing brief." After I hung up, I made the second call of my plan. This one was to Marcus's office. "Hi Jennifer, this is Rebecca Crawford. I'm trying to reach Marcus, but his cell phone seems to be going straight to voicemail." "Oh hi, Mrs. Crawford. Mr. Crawford left about an hour ago for a dinner meeting. He said he'd be difficult to reach this evening." "That's right, he mentioned the Henderson dinner. Listen, I just got a call from his biggest client. Apparently there's an emergency with the Westchester project, and they need him to meet them at the property tomorrow evening around 7. I know it's short notice, but they're flying back to Chicago tomorrow night, and this is the only time that works for them. Could you please make sure he gets the message first thing in the morning?" Jennifer promised to put a note on Marcus's desk and send him an email marked urgent. The trap was set. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., Marcus would go to Vanessa's office thinking he was meeting a crucial client. Vanessa would be there waiting for what she thought was a building showing with potential investors. And I would be there to introduce myself properly to both of them. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through different scenarios, imagining how the conversation might go, what Marcus would say when he realized I knew everything, what Vanessa would do when she understood who I really was. But more than that, I was imagining the moment when they both realized they'd been completely wrong about who held the power in this situation. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. I went through the motions at Patterson and Associates, answering emails and attending meetings, but my mind was entirely focused on the evening ahead. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a tailored black dress that looked professional but expensive, paired with the diamond earrings my grandmother had left me. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a woman with serious money and the confidence to use it. At 6:30, I parked across the street from my own building and watched Vanessa arrive. She was wearing a white blouse and navy pants, professional attire for meeting with potential investors. She looked nervous, checking her phone repeatedly as she waited outside the building entrance. At 6:55, Marcus's BMW pulled up. I watched him park and walk toward the building, checking his own phone as he approached the entrance. He was wearing his best suit, the one he saved for his most important clients. I gave them 5 minutes to encounter each other and start wondering what was happening, then I crossed the street and entered my own building. I found them standing together in the lobby, both looking confused. Marcus was saying something to Vanessa about expecting to meet a client, while she was explaining that she was waiting for her landlord to show the building to investors. "Good evening," I said, walking toward them with a smile that felt more like showing teeth. "I think you're both here to see me." Marcus turned around, and the expression on his face went from confusion to shock to something that might have been fear. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" Vanessa was looking back and forth between us, trying to piece together what was happening. "I'm sorry, do you two know each other?" "Oh, we haven't been properly introduced," I said, extending my hand to Vanessa. "I'm Rebecca Crawford, Marcus's wife." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the building's air conditioning system humming above us. Vanessa went completely pale, her hand still in mine from the handshake. Marcus looked like he was trying to solve a math problem that didn't make sense. "I think we need to have a conversation," I said, still smiling that sharp smile. "And I think we should have it upstairs, in Vanessa's office. Since I own the building, I have keys to all the units." I turned and walked toward the elevator, not looking back to see if they were following. But I could hear their footsteps behind me, and when the elevator doors closed, we were all standing together in a space that felt much too small for the size of the explosion that was about to happen. The elevator ride to the third floor lasted exactly 43 seconds, but it felt like an hour. I could see both Marcus and Vanessa in the reflection of the polished steel doors, their faces showing different versions of panic as they tried to process what was happening. Vanessa broke the silence first. "Marcus, you told me you were separated." "We need to talk about this privately," Marcus said, his voice tight with the kind of control he used in difficult business negotiations. "Actually," I said as the elevator dinged and the doors opened, "I think we're past the point of private conversations." Vanessa's office was exactly as I remembered it from the building inspections, modern, sleek, with those floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city lights. Her desk was covered with fabric samples and architectural drawings, the tools of a business that I was helping to support every month with the rent she paid me. I walked to the center of the room and turned to face them both. Marcus had positioned himself slightly in front of Vanessa, as if he could somehow protect her from this conversation. The gesture would have been touching if it wasn't so pointless. "So," I said, setting my purse down on Vanessa's conference table, "I think we should start with introductions. Vanessa, you know me as Rebecca Walsh, your landlord. But my full name is Rebecca Walsh Crawford, and I've been married to Marcus for 8 years." Vanessa looked at Marcus with an expression I recognized, the look of someone who just realized they'd been lied to about something fundamental. "Marcus told me you were getting divorced," she said quietly. "I'm sure he told you a lot of things," I replied. "Marcus, why don't you tell Vanessa about the divorce papers you filed?" "Oh wait, you haven't filed any divorce papers, have you?" Marcus's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching. "Rebecca, this isn't the time or place." "Actually, this is the perfect place," I interrupted. "Because Vanessa should understand exactly what she's gotten herself involved in. And you should understand exactly what you're throwing away." I opened my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. "Vanessa, you might be interested to know that the man you're sleeping with has been meeting with a divorce attorney, planning to leave his marriage so he can be with you. But he's been waiting until after his next big commission check, because he wants to make sure he can afford to pay alimony to his underachieving wife. I saw Vanessa's eyes widen as she absorbed this information. Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. The interesting thing is, I continued, Marcus has been telling you that I don't understand his ambitions, that I'm holding him back from the life he really wants. Isn't that right, Marcus? Rebecca, stop. But here's what neither of you understand about Marcus's underachieving wife. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Walsh Systems, the business I've been building for the past 5 years while Marcus thought I was having coffee with friends, generated $2.3 million in revenue last year. I placed the business financial statement on Vanessa's desk where they could both see it. This building we're standing in? I bought it 3 years ago for $400,000. It's now worth almost $2 million, and it generates over $20,000 a month in rental income. I added the property deed and tax assessment to the growing pile of documents. The land development project in upstate New York that's going to generate $25 million over the next 5 years? That's mine too. Inherited from my grandmother, developed through my business partnerships. Marcus was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that while you've been planning to divorce me and take half of our marital assets, you've had no idea what our marital assets actually are. I pulled out the final document, a complete net worth statement I'd had my accountant prepare that morning. My current net worth is approximately $4 to $7 million, Marcus. You've been married to a multimillionaire for 5 years and never bothered to notice. The silence in the room was deafening. Vanessa had sunk into her desk chair, staring at the documents. Marcus was standing frozen in the middle of the room, his mouth slightly open. Vanessa, I said, turning to address her directly, I want you to understand something. Every month, you write me a rent check for $3,800. That money goes into the same account that's been funding the business expansion that made me wealthy enough to buy this building in the first place. You've been literally paying me while you sleep with my husband. Vanessa's face had gone from pale to completely white. I had no idea. Of course you didn't. Just like you had no idea that Marcus has been using our joint credit card to pay for your dinners at Le Bernardin and those weekend trips to the Hamptons. Just like you had no idea that when he told you his wife didn't understand his ambitions, he was talking about a woman who built a business empire while he was closing residential real estate deals. I turned back to Marcus, who looked like he was in shock. Did you really think I didn't know about the affair, Marcus? Did you think I was too stupid to figure out where you were going all those evenings when you claimed to be showing properties? I don't understand how. Marcus was stammering, trying to process everything I'd just revealed. You don't understand how I built all this without you knowing? It's actually pretty simple. While you were focused on your golf games and your networking dinners and apparently your girlfriend, I was focused on building something real. Something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or support. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights, gathering my thoughts for what I needed to say next. Here's what's going to happen, I said, not turning around to face them. Marcus, you wanted a divorce so you could start over with Vanessa. You can have your divorce. But since I'll be the one filing, it's going to happen on my terms. I turned back to them. Vanessa, your lease on this space expires at the end of next month. I won't be renewing it. You'll need to find somewhere else for your business. Rebecca, you can't, Marcus started. I can do whatever I want, Marcus. It's my building. I looked at Vanessa, who was still sitting in stunned silence. I'm not doing this to punish you, Vanessa. I'm doing it because I don't think it's appropriate for my husband's mistress to be my tenant. I'm sure you understand. I gathered up my documents and put them back in the folder. I'll give you both some time to process all of this. Marcus, I'll be staying at the Marriott downtown tonight. When you're ready to have a conversation about how we're going to handle the divorce, you can call me. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and Marcus, you might want to call James Morrison and let him know you'll be needing a different kind of legal strategy. Because the high-asset divorce he was planning to handle for you just became a lot more complicated. I left them standing there in Vanessa's office, surrounded by the evidence of a life they'd never imagined I was living. As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete control over my own destiny. But I also felt something else, a kind of emptiness that surprised me. I'd been planning this confrontation for weeks, imagining how satisfying it would be to see the shock on their faces when they realized how wrong they'd been about me. And it had been satisfying, in a way. But it had also been sad. Because I'd just ended my marriage in front of my husband's mistress, in an office building I owned, surrounded by the evidence of a secret life I'd built because I'd been afraid to be fully honest with the person I'd promised to spend my life with. The revenge was perfect, but the victory felt hollow. And I was about to discover that the real consequences of this night were just beginning. I didn't sleep at all that night in the hotel room. I kept replaying the scene in Vanessa's office, analyzing every word, every expression, every moment of silence. Part of me felt triumphant. I'd finally shown them both exactly who they were dealing with. But another part of me felt like I'd just detonated a bomb in my own life. My phone started ringing at 6 in the morning. Marcus. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message while I ordered room service coffee. Rebecca, we need to talk. What you did last night. I don't even know where to start. Call me back. His voice sounded different, smaller somehow, like he was trying to process something too big for his understanding. The second call came 20 minutes later. Rebecca, please. I know I screwed up, but we can work this out. We've been married 8 years. That has to count for something. Call me. By noon, he'd left 7 voicemails. Each one revealed a different stage of processing what he'd learned. Shock gave way to confusion, confusion to anger, anger to something that sounded almost like panic. The 8th message was different. I talked to Jim Morrison this morning. He says you're right about the asset division. He says if you file first and you can prove the timeline of when you acquired everything. Rebecca, please call me. We need to figure this out. I deleted all the messages and ordered lunch from room service. That afternoon, Patricia Reeves called. I heard about last night, she said without preamble. Word travels fast in certain circles. How are you holding up? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Good. But I wanted to give you a heads up. Vanessa Chen called her attorney this morning. Apparently, she's concerned about potential retaliation since you're her landlord and she was involved with your husband. I laughed, though it didn't sound particularly happy. Retaliation? I'm not renewing her lease. That's not retaliation, it's business. Legally, you're right. But you should know that Marcus spent the morning at Morrison's office, and they've been making calls. I think they're trying to find an angle to challenge your asset claims. Let them try, I said. Everything I built is documented. Every property purchase, every business investment, every development deal. I have 5 years of financial records that show exactly how and when I acquired everything. I'm not questioning your legal position, Patricia said carefully. I'm just saying that when people feel cornered and desperate, they sometimes do unpredictable things. Be careful, Rebecca. After I hung up with Patricia, I realized I needed to start thinking about practical next steps. I called my attorney, not a divorce attorney, but the corporate lawyer who'd been handling my business and property acquisitions. David Chen, no relation to Vanessa, had been my legal counsel for 3 years. He was thorough, discreet, and unflappable, exactly what I needed right now. I need to file for divorce, I told him when I reached his office that afternoon. And I need to make sure my business assets are protected. David listened while I explained the situation, occasionally asking questions about timelines and documentation. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Rebecca, I have to ask, why didn't you ever mention being married when we were setting up your business structures? It was a fair question. I kept my maiden name for business purposes, and I wanted to keep my professional life separate from my personal life. I never thought it would matter legally. It matters now, David said. But the good news is that because you used your maiden name and kept all the business finances completely separate, we should be able to make a strong argument that these are separate assets. The properties are more complicated because they were purchased during the marriage, but we can work with that. We spent the next 2 hours going through my financial records, preparing a comprehensive asset inventory that would protect my interests in the divorce proceedings. One more thing, David said as I was getting ready to leave. You should probably go home and get whatever personal items you want to keep. Once you file these papers tomorrow, your husband is going to be served, and things might get more complicated after that. I drove back to Westchester that evening as the sun was setting. The house looked the same as always. Perfect landscaping, clean driveway, the kind of suburban prosperity that looked stable from the outside. Marcus's car was in the driveway. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at our granite breakfast bar with a glass of whiskey and what looked like several legal documents spread out in front of him. "You came home," he said without looking up. "I came to get some things." "Rebecca." He finally looked at me, and I was surprised to see that his eyes were red-rimmed, like he'd been crying. "We need to talk. I think we said everything we needed to say last night." "No, we didn't." He stood up, swaying slightly. The whiskey wasn't his first drink of the evening. "We didn't talk about 8 years of marriage. We didn't talk about how you've been lying to me for years about who you really are." I set my purse down on the counter. "I've been lying to you. You built a fortune behind my back, Rebecca. You bought properties, started a business, made investments, all while pretending to be my struggling wife who needed my support. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I pretended to need your support while you were pretending to be faithful. At least my deception made us both richer." "That's not the point." Marcus's voice was getting louder. "The point is that you made me feel like I was the successful one in this marriage. You made me feel like I was taking care of you, providing for our future, while you were secretly building an empire that makes my income look like pocket money." I stared at him, finally understanding what was really bothering him. "You're not angry that I lied to you, Marcus. You're angry that I'm more successful than you are." "That's not true." "It is true. You're not upset that I kept secrets. You're upset that the secrets make you look small." I walked closer to him, close enough to see the fear behind the anger in his eyes. "You spent months planning to divorce your underachieving wife so you could upgrade to someone more worthy of your success. And now you've found out that your underachieving wife is worth more than you'll ever be." "I never said you were underachieving." "You didn't have to say it. You showed me every day for years. Every time you dismissed my work as a hobby. Every time you introduced me as the wife with the little job. Every time you made decisions about our life without consulting me because you assumed your opinion mattered more." Marcus finished his whiskey in one swallow. "So what now? You destroy our marriage over a mistake I made. You call 6 months with another woman a mistake. I call it a symptom of a marriage that was already broken." He was getting defensive now, which meant he was getting desperate. "We haven't been happy for years, Rebecca. We've been going through the motions, pretending everything was fine while we both knew it wasn't." He wasn't wrong about that, but hearing him say it still stung. "You're right," I said quietly. "We have been pretending. But the difference between us is that while I was pretending to be happy in our marriage, I was building something real with my life. While you were pretending to be happy in our marriage, you were building a relationship with someone else." I turned to walk toward the stairs, but Marcus grabbed my arm. "Don't walk away from this, Rebecca. Don't throw away 8 years because you're angry." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "Let go of me, Marcus. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can figure out how to be honest with each other. Let go of me." He released my arm, but he was still standing too close, still radiating the kind of desperate energy that made me nervous. "I'm going upstairs to pack some things," I said calmly. "And then I'm leaving. Tomorrow, you'll be served with divorce papers. After that, all communication goes through our attorneys." Rebecca, please. But I was already walking away, heading upstairs to collect the pieces of a life I was finally ready to leave behind. As I packed my clothes and personal items, I could hear Marcus downstairs, pacing and talking on the phone. Probably calling his attorney, or maybe calling Vanessa to tell her how badly everything had gone. When I came back downstairs with my suitcases, he was standing in the foyer waiting for me. "This is really it?" he asked. "This is really it? What about the house?" I looked around at the beautiful home we'd shared, with its perfect decor and carefully maintained facade. "What about it? Are you going to try to take it in the divorce?" I almost laughed. After everything I'd revealed about my wealth and success, he was worried about keeping the house. "Marcus," I said, walking toward the door, "I can buy 10 houses like this with what I make in a year. Keep the house. I never liked it anyway." I left him standing there in the foyer, surrounded by the symbols of a life that had looked successful from the outside but had been hollow at its core. As I drove away, I realized that for the first time in years, I had no idea what came next. But I also realized that for the first time in years, that felt like freedom instead of fear. 3 weeks later, Marcus showed up at my new apartment. I'd rented a penthouse in Manhattan, something I'd never allowed myself to do when I was married because it would have been impossible to explain to Marcus how we could afford it. But now that I was living openly as Rebecca Walsh Crawford, multimillionaire business owner, I figured I might as well enjoy the benefits. The apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows, a terrace overlooking Central Park, and more space than I knew what to do with. I'd been rattling around in it like a marble in a jar, trying to figure out how to live as myself instead of the smaller version of myself I'd been performing for 8 years. Marcus looked terrible. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, stubble that suggested he hadn't shaved in days, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "How did you find out where I live?" I asked, not inviting him inside. "I hired my own private investigator," he said. "Rebecca, we need to talk. We have lawyers for that. Not about the divorce. About Vanessa." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What about Vanessa?" "She's gone. She left the city 3 days ago. Broke her lease on the apartment, closed her business, just disappeared." I studied his face, trying to read what he wasn't telling me. And she's pregnant, Rebecca. She's pregnant, and she's gone, and it's my fault." The world tilted slightly. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "Pregnant?" She found out 2 days after that night at her office. She'd been feeling sick for weeks, but she thought it was stress from work. When she took the test and it came back positive, she called me crying. I tried to process this information, but my brain felt like it was moving through molasses. "How pregnant?" "About 8 weeks. 8 weeks. Which meant it had happened right around the time Marcus and I were having our last honest conversation about the Henderson dinner party, back when I still thought our marriage might be salvageable. "She wants me to choose," Marcus continued. "Between you and her. Between the divorce and starting over with her and the baby." "And what did you tell her?" Marcus's face crumpled. "I told her I couldn't choose. I told her I needed time to figure everything out. And she said she wasn't going to wait around to be someone's backup plan." I stepped aside and let him into the apartment. Not because I felt sorry for him, but because this conversation was too complicated to have in a hallway where neighbors might overhear. Marcus walked to the windows and stood looking out at the park. "She left me a note. Said she was going back to California to stay with her sister until she figured out what to do about the baby." "What do you want from me, Marcus?" He turned around to face me. "I want to know if there's any chance we can fix this. Any chance we can get past everything that's happened and try to save our marriage." The question hung in the air between us like smoke. "You want to know if I'll take you back now that your girlfriend is gone and you're facing the prospect of child support payments for the next 18 years. That's not what this is about. Isn't it?" I walked to my kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. I didn't offer him anything. Let me see if I understand the situation. You spent months planning to leave me for Vanessa. You met with a divorce attorney to figure out how to get alimony from your underachieving wife. You told your girlfriend that your marriage was over emotionally and that you were just waiting for the right financial moment to file for divorce. Marcus winced with each point, but he didn't deny any of it. Then you found out that your underachieving wife is actually worth $50 million, and your sophisticated girlfriend is pregnant with your baby and has decided she doesn't want to be with a man who can't make up his mind about what he wants. Rebecca. So now you're here, asking if we can work things out. Not because you love me or because you miss our marriage, but because you've run out of other options. That's not fair. I laughed, and it sounded harsh even to my own ears. Fair? Marcus, you cheated on me for 6 months, planned to divorce me, and now you want me to take you back because your mistress dumped you. And I'm the one who's being unfair. I made mistakes. I know I made mistakes. But we had 8 good years before everything went wrong. Did we? I set down my wine and looked at him directly. Or did we have 8 years where I made myself smaller so you could feel bigger? 8 years where I hid who I really was because I was afraid it would threaten you. You didn't have to hide anything from me. Didn't I? Marcus, look at how you're reacting now that you know the truth. You're not proud of what I built or impressed by what I accomplished. You're angry that I succeeded without your knowledge or permission. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. Maybe you're right, he said finally. Maybe I am angry about that. Maybe it does threaten me to find out that you're more successful than I ever imagined. It was the first completely honest thing he'd said since he'd arrived. But I'm also scared, Rebecca. I'm scared because I just lost everything. My marriage, my girlfriend, and now there's going to be a baby that I don't know how to handle. I'm 40 years old, and I feel like my entire life just collapsed. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What did you think was going to happen when you started the affair, Marcus? Did you think there would be no consequences? Did you think you could have both lives indefinitely? I thought. He trailed off, then started again. I thought I was unhappy in our marriage, and I thought Vanessa represented something I was missing. I thought I could transition from one life to the other without anyone getting hurt. And what do you think now? Now I think I don't know what I want or who I am without the stories I've been telling myself about my life. That, at least, was honest. I can't fix that for you, Marcus. I can't make you feel better about the choices you made or help you figure out who you want to be. I know. I needed to ask. I needed to know if there was any chance. I looked at this man I'd been married to for 8 years, standing in my beautiful apartment, asking me to save him from the consequences of his own decisions. The divorce papers were filed yesterday, I said gently. It's over, Marcus. He nodded like he'd expected that answer but had needed to hear it anyway. What about the baby? I asked. I don't know. Vanessa's not answering my calls. I don't even know if she's planning to, if she's going to keep it. That's her decision to make. I know. But if she does keep it, I want to be involved. I want to be a father to that child. Then you need to focus on figuring out how to do that instead of trying to undo the past. Marcus walked back toward the door. For what it's worth, Rebecca, I am sorry. Not just about the affair, but about making you feel like you had to hide who you really were. You built something incredible, and I should have been celebrating that instead of feeling threatened by it. It was too little, too late, but it was something. Take care of yourself, Marcus. And if Vanessa does decide to have the baby, try to be better for that child than you were for me. After he left, I stood in my beautiful apartment, surrounded by the life I'd built and the freedom I'd earned, and I felt empty. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd shown everyone who'd underestimated me exactly who I really was. I'd won. So why did it feel like I'd lost something important along the way? 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected phone call. Mrs. Crawford? This is Jennifer Morrison from Morrison Family Law. I'm calling on behalf of Vanessa Chen. I was in my office at Walsh Systems headquarters, the building I'd purchased and renovated in Lower Manhattan to house my expanding business operations. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Hudson River and the busy harbor beyond. I'm not sure why Ms. Chen would want to speak with me, I said carefully. She asked me to reach out because she's trying to contact your ex-husband, and he seems to have made himself difficult to reach. That was one way to put it. From what I'd heard through mutual acquaintances, Marcus had been struggling since the divorce. He'd lost several major clients, apparently due to his inability to focus on work, and had moved out of the Westchester house into a small apartment in Queens. What does she need from him? She had the baby, Mrs. Crawford. A little girl. She was born 3 weeks ago, and Ms. Chen is trying to establish paternity and work out custody arrangements. A baby. Marcus had a daughter. I'll see if I can get a message to him, I said. But I can't guarantee he'll respond. Thank you. And Mrs. Crawford? Ms. Chen wanted me to tell you that she's sorry for everything that happened. After I hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the water and thinking about second chances and the weight of choices that can't be undone. I did manage to get a message to Marcus through his real estate broker, who was apparently one of the few people still in regular contact with him. 3 days later, he called me back. Rebecca, I heard from Vanessa's attorney. Are you going to see the baby? I'm flying to California next week. We're going to try to work out some kind of arrangement. He sounded different, quieter, less certain of himself than the man I'd been married to. That's good, Marcus. A child needs her father. I don't know if I know how to be a father. I don't know if I know how to be anything anymore. It was the most vulnerable thing I'd ever heard him say. You'll figure it out. You have to. There was a long pause on the phone. Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. If I hadn't had the affair, if I hadn't screwed everything up so badly, would you have told me about the business? About the money? Would we have made it? I've been asking myself the same question for months. I don't know, I said finally. I think I was afraid to find out. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you knew how successful I was, you'd either try to control it or you'd resent me for it. Afraid that you'd see me as competition instead of a partner. And now? Now I think I was probably right to be afraid, but I also think I was wrong to let that fear make my decisions for me. What do you mean? I looked around my office, at the awards on the wall, the photos of successful projects, the evidence of everything I'd built while hiding who I really was. I mean that I spent so many years making myself smaller to protect other people's feelings that I forgot what it felt like to take up the space I actually needed. And when I finally stopped pretending to be smaller than I was, it felt like revenge instead of just living. Do you regret it? The way you handled everything? It was a fair question. I regret that it took me so long to be honest. I regret that we both spent years in a marriage where neither of us were showing up as our real selves. I regret that it ended the way it did. But I don't regret building the business or buying the properties or becoming financially independent. And I don't regret finally showing you who I really was, even if the timing was dramatic. I deserved the drama, Marcus said quietly. Maybe. But I also could have chosen a different way to handle it. We talked for a few more minutes about logistics. He needed some financial documents for the paternity and custody proceedings, and there were still a few loose ends to tie up with the divorce settlement. But underneath the practical conversation, there was something else, a kind of closure that felt more peaceful than I'd expected. After we hung up, I realized something had shifted for me. For months, I'd been carrying around anger and satisfaction in equal measure, feeling vindicated but also strangely hollow. But talking to Marcus about his daughter, hearing him acknowledge his mistakes and take responsibility for the consequences, had somehow released me from the need to keep proving my point. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister Emma in Portland. Emma was 3 years older than me, a pediatric nurse who'd been married to the same man for 12 years and had 2 kids who thought their Aunt Rebecca was mysterious because she lived in New York and wore expensive clothes. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" Emma answered on the second ring. "Nothing's wrong." "Why does something have to be wrong?" "Because you never call unless something's wrong. You text, you send holiday cards, you occasionally email photos, but you don't call." She was right. I'd been holding everyone in my family at arm's length for years, the same way I'd been holding Marcus at arm's length, afraid that getting too close would somehow diminish me. "I got divorced," I said. "What? When? Why didn't you tell me?" "It was finalized 3 months ago. And I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure how to explain it." "Oh honey, I'm so sorry. What happened?" So I told her. Not everything, not about the revenge or the dramatic confrontation, but about the affair, about the business I'd been hiding, about the ways Marcus and I had both been living lies. "Wait," Emma said when I finished. "You own a multi-million-dollar business? And you never mentioned it." "I never mentioned it to anyone. I was protecting it, I guess." "From what?" "From people who might try to take it away from me or make it smaller than it was." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Rebecca, do you think maybe you were protecting it from people who might celebrate it? People who might be proud of you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Mom and Dad are going to be so proud when they find out what you've accomplished. I mean that I've been worried about you for years because you seemed so diminished by that marriage, and now I find out you were building an empire the whole time." I started crying then, sitting in my beautiful apartment with my sister on the phone, finally understanding what I'd been doing to myself all these years. I was so afraid of being too much for people that I forgot what it felt like to be enough for myself, I said through the tears. "Oh, sweetie." I turned my success into a weapon instead of just enjoying it. "But you can change that now, right? You can start living as yourself instead of hiding who you are." She was right. I could change that now. Over the next few months, I did exactly that. I started being honest with my family about my business and my life. I hired a publicist and started doing interviews about Walsh Systems, sharing our story and our approach with other entrepreneurs. I joined boards of directors for organizations I cared about, using my success to open doors instead of hiding behind them. I also started dating, carefully, slowly, but without hiding who I was or what I'd built. I went out with a tech entrepreneur who was impressed by my business model, a non-profit director who appreciated my charitable giving, a fellow real estate investor who understood my industry. None of them turned into anything serious, but they helped me remember what it felt like to be seen and appreciated for who I actually was instead of a smaller version of myself. A year after the divorce, I received a photo in the mail. It was from Vanessa, a picture of a beautiful baby girl with Marcus's eyes and Vanessa's delicate features. On the back, she'd written, "Emma Rose Chen Crawford. Born March 15th. She's perfect." I put the photo on my desk and looked at it for a long time. This little girl was going to grow up with parents who'd made mistakes but were trying to do better. She was going to know her father, even if her parents weren't together. And maybe, if everyone kept working on themselves, she'd grow up understanding that people are complicated and imperfect, but that doesn't mean they can't love her completely. Looking at that photo, I realized something important. The story I'd been telling myself about revenge and vindication wasn't actually the story of my life. The real story was about a woman who'd been afraid to take up space, who'd built something extraordinary while hiding it from the world, and who'd finally learned that success isn't something you have to apologize for or weaponize. Success is something you get to live with openly and honestly, sharing it with people who deserve to see you as you really are. That's the story I'm living now. Not the story of the night I got revenge on my cheating husband, but the story of the day I decided to stop hiding and start living as myself. And if you're watching this from somewhere in the world where you've been making yourself smaller to make other people comfortable, I want you to know, you don't have to do that anymore. You get to be exactly as successful, as ambitious, as brilliant, as wealthy, as powerful as you actually are. You get to take up the space you need. And you get to do it without apology. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you had to hide your success or dim your light for someone else's comfort, I want to hear from you in the comments. Share your story, tell me where you're watching from, and let's remind each other that we don't have to be small to be loved. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that the best revenge is living authentically. Because that's exactly what I'm doing now, and it's better than any dramatic confrontation I could have scripted. Thanks for listening to my story. Thanks for seeing me as I really am.